Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Pivoted Success podcast featuring our co-host Sean Cochran from TCC Canada and myself, Jared Goldsmith from eSAX Virtual Events. Today, we're very pleased to be featuring Robert Hocking, who is an entrepreneur, teacher, and writer. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chance. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Robert, let's talk a little bit about your background. Who are you? What are you all about?
Well, that's a fine question. So I'm originally from Ottawa. I moved away 20 years ago after I started my career here in the advertising industry. I created a business that grew into a group of 4 businesses that did well for a number of years. And when the tech sector took a dump in 2001, we were badly affected. I reorganized the business, sold my shares, and I moved on. So from there, I moved to Toronto. I was a vice president at a global company working on marketing strategy. From there, I got promoted through the ranks of this large holding company called WPP, and I was eventually recruited to go to the UK, where I sat on the board of a very famous branding and retail design company called Fitch. I served on the board. At the time, we had 17 offices, and my role was basically to work with our major clients on their strategy across the business. So my goal, though, in going there was ultimately to learn more about the food and retail sector, with the ambition of coming back and actually launching a food business here in Canada. And one thing led to another. The goal of staying there for 2 years and coming back turned into 13 years. And eventually did develop and run a food business, but it was in the UK. So my family and I returned a year ago. What drove that? I'd been living in the UK. I'd been working internationally for a number of years. London is an amazing city, but it's also a very trying city. And I had 3 young kids. I wanted them to discover their Canadianness, and they were starting to develop British accents. And I thought, we just can't have that. So, although it sounds very cute, came back here and decided to focus my attention in the areas that you introduced me around. So entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur in residence with the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. I also run a consultancy where I work with businesses on business and brand strategy, and I'm a writer as well. So that's the long and the short of it.
It's a very well-rounded background, Robert. Having the chance to travel and learn all about entrepreneurship from angles, and now that you're teaching it as well in multiple ways, from the writing to entrepreneurs in residence. Let's talk about 2 things. How were you affected by COVID and your family, if you wish to divulge such information? And how was the business side, the entrepreneur side of you affected?
It's interesting because there's a few dimensions to that. At the time, I was doing a lot of consulting with large organizations. So, there was virtually no change of pace or of work. So I was working with Kellogg's in the United States. I was working with Imperial Tobacco in Europe. And I was working with a couple of small clients. All of these businesses basically continued business as usual. I was very fortunate in that effect because other than being able to avoid the challenging trips across London in rush hour, I basically continued doing the work I was doing, but just doing it remotely. The big thing I noticed, though, from a professional standpoint, was that the work environment with clients became more casual. What happened was, and again, you can imagine the dynamics within any business can be a challenge sometimes, particularly large companies. You've got a lot of different layers, senior people. What was interesting was that because we were all working from home, it felt like we were all cutting one another a bit more slack. When your dog is coming in, you're bursting in, and you're seeing people's real insight rather than just a professional business suit. It actually made the work environment, I found, actually quite a bit more positive. So that was on the personal front. I wasn't really that affected, but we also made the decision as a family that we were going to move back to Canada, and we moved right in the middle of the lockdown. And again, a lot of people were like, "What, were you crazy?" And it was far easier than I expected. I kind of assumed it would be relatively straightforward. It turned out it was relatively straightforward. The biggest challenge really came for us because we'd been away for so long. I've been in Ottawa for 20 years. I'd grown up, gone to school here, been away for a long time. it was coming back, and the need was to come back and reestablish myself professionally. That was one dimension to it. But the other, I have 3 young kids. I have a teenage daughter that was pushing to come to, she was really keen to do Canadian high school experience. We all came back, and the kids struggled to make friends because they were learning online. So it was more the challenge of watching my family in a new environment, trying to connect and trying to make those kind of social connections that were.
Robert, what type of experience did you prep your family for? Like, did you have one-on-ones with, we're moving to a new place? Like, how did you approach the subject for them to let them know it will be a new life?
That's a really good question. So I was lucky. I've got 2 younger daughters. So at the time they were 7 and 9. So they were essentially like pieces of luggage. They can go anywhere. Of course, they weren't that happy to leave their friends, but their experiences of being in Canada was positive because it was always on holiday. So they kind of thought that everything was, candy floss and chocolate milk. So the fact is that they were like, great, we're going to Canada. That's awesome. And my teenage daughter was actually the one that was pushing for it. The one that was the hardest was actually my wife. My wife, who's also from Ottawa, was not that keen on coming back. And the big issue was winter. So being in the UK, it's gray, but it's not that cold in the winter. It might go down to 5 degrees or something. So at one point, we were back here. We had a pile of snow on our front lawn that was taller than my wife. And I remember walking my kids to school one day. It was minus 20. And my youngest looked at me and said, Dad, why have you brought us here? They were actually quite keen on the shift, but it was like the ugly face of winter that made everybody say, can we please move away again?
But during COVID, like, how was their mentality? Like, we're talking about entrepreneurship as part of the podcast, but bringing in the family aspect is a big part of, the mental health for people. So,
do you know what? We had been living abroad as an isolated unit in a way for a long time. We're living in a place, of course, we had lots of great friends. Many of them were expats. The fact is you're not operating in an environment the way that you would operate here. So we were used to being, on our own and occasionally having friends around. So it didn't feel that different when we came back. Obviously, we're suddenly back after a long time away, and we're wanting to connect with family that we haven't had regular contact with. And that was a challenge. But it just felt like a bit of a continuation. It was pretty relaxed. It wasn't a big deal, to be honest. We liked the time together, and it was more of the same, I felt.
I have to imagine as well the actual physical move of it all too would be maybe not so bad when the streets are empty and things are locked down versus having to battle people to get in and out of places, right?
Yeah, and we were lucky. We lived in a house in central London. We were fortunate in that. Coming back here, the big things that changed, and this also has an effect on business, is the energy of the business and the living environment there is very intense. Coming back here, we discovered, beautiful home, kids are playing on the streets. It was a very chilled environment. It was actually quite nice to come back to after quite an intense period of living abroad. So, and to your point, Sean, it wasn't difficult finding movers. It wasn't difficult finding plane tickets. It wasn't difficult. So I know, bad news stories probably play better, but we found it pretty easy, actually.
That's really good to hear, Robert. But how has the whole COVID situation affected your entrepreneurship teaching?
I have to say I was really lucky. Like, we had a lot of reticence coming back to Ottawa. A big thing was, prior to working in London, I'd worked in New York, I'd worked in Chicago, I'd worked in Toronto. The fact is, you're talking about, some pretty major centers there where a lot of exciting and interesting stuff is happening. So the biggest question was, well, how do we feel going back to where we come from? It's a very different city than where we've been practicing. So the fact is, I had been in an international role. We're in a situation where yes, there's a fair amount of travel involved, but a lot of the interaction with clients, with businesses, is like this, or over the phone. So I guess my position was, I had seen the fact that there were brilliant businesses all over the world, and I'd worked with a bunch of them. I didn't feel, actually, the biggest decision for me was, would I lose access to them? And I realized, because of, this kind of interaction, COVID kind of forced the issue a little more, that there was no reason why I couldn't maintain those relationships. So I came back, certain that I'd be able to continue the work. But the other thing was, I was coming back to Ottawa with a very different skill set than a lot of people in my profession in this city. I know what it is to be Canadian. I know what it is to work in a small market, but I'd also gone and seen the fact that great businesses happen everywhere. And I think that was a real advantage to me. Like, I've worked with guys like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola and Ford, and I've worked with tons of tech startups. I've worked with a lot of big tech startups. So the reality is, I was bringing a skill set back. And I think what was surprising to me was a lot of people were interested in hearing what I had to say about their business because of where I was coming from.
Robert,
So
I'm sorry, that's a great background you have. Would you be able to talk about how, you don't have to name names, but how some of the larger organizations perhaps have adapted to COVID? Because a lot of the times we're interviewing small local business community leaders, but you have more of a global perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest with you, I've seen both sides of it, because I've done a lot of work in retail as well. And so a couple things to consider. I think, what I was hearing from them were the challenge. Like, on one case, I was working on the launch of a new product that was going to be launched in Russia and Greece, and there was massive supply chain issues that were holding back the launch of these products. Plus, the ability to go on the ground and and really map out your strategy on the ground with the reality of, rather than being at a distance from it, made it especially difficult. So that was a factor. I think another factor was their overall uncertainty was making them a bit more cautious. I mentioned earlier I was working with Kellogg, so these guys were seeing their business go through the roof. Just because people were buying particularly more comfort-related foods. So, that was a factor. But conversely, over a 90-day period in COVID, the e-commerce saw growth that analysts had predicted would only occur within 10 years. So what was happening was, consumers were suddenly being forced to shop online. They were being exposed to more interesting products, and they started to sample more. So I think that, while a lot of these larger players I was referencing were seeing upticks in their sales in certain respects, a lot of smaller businesses were discovering, if they pivoted correctly, that they could actually engage consumers differently. So, not surprisingly, the direct-to-consumer model that allows brands to bypass traditional retail channels, took off. And there's a lot of really interesting disruptive brands out there. So the fact is that the large companies, were already well entrenched, already well distributed, and small companies were suddenly forced to adapt in ways that maybe they wouldn't have done as quickly, and some of them saw success. So that's what I observed.
Sean, over to you.
Yeah, Robert, it's very exciting to hear some of the sort of perspectives from that side of things, because again, like Jared mentioned, we are talking often to a lot of the sort of smaller localized businesses, which have, of course, had to deal with this awful pandemic, but are being able to see that a global world for anybody. Just because you operate your business in Ottawa doesn't mean that you can't reach further than that. And now we've been thrust into this virtual world, like it or not. So more and more you're seeing that sort of escape from that sort of closed, localized sort of mentality, right? In terms of how you do your business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny. You asked me how I adapted. We haven't yet asked me what I've observed. And I think one of the things that I've observed is that certainly the most dynamic environments that I've witnessed around the world are environments that have, the best word I can use to describe it is they have angst. A lot of these businesses or environments that are really dynamic, that are creating really interesting businesses, have got a tension in them that makes people want to change and makes people want to take on challenges in a different way. What I've discovered here is, Ottawa is wonderfully great for family. It's a very comfortable city. So it lacks some of those disruptive elements that I'm used to. And I think the thing that I've observed was, and certainly the thing that I've been preaching a lot of, is to local businesses, you've got you've got to see your business as being outside the city limits. Because the fact is, a lot of consumers today are being influenced. They're shaping what they see and accept. They're being shaped by businesses that aren't growing up here. So my advice to any small business here is stop looking down the street and start looking across the globe, because those are the companies that are going to come and shape perception from consumers. And I think, sorry,
please continue, Robert.
I was just going to say, but to be honest with you, and I won't name names, there are a lot of people in this city that are resistant to that still think, no, it's got to be about the local community. And personally, I'm telling you that is short-sighted, because if your competition is down the street today, I guarantee you there's somebody out there that's starting a business that's going to take your business, and they're coming out of places like India or Europe or the US. And you've got to stay on top of those guys.
And this is not to confuse the whole shop local movement. This is as an entrepreneur thinking bigger picture.
Oh, for sure. Because the reality is, I'm interviewing a couple of entrepreneurs later today. Both of them are from Ottawa. Both of them, one's a first-generation immigrant, the other one's a second-generation immigrant. A lot of the most interesting businesses I've seen in this city since I've been back is actually being started by people who are immigrants. And, this city's reputation is basically government and tech. And when I came here, I was like, where are the great companies? Shopify's a great company, but I don't, the tech sector is not often the real world of business. They don't necessarily have to bootstrap themselves in the way that a normal business would. They don't have to build their business one customer at a time. A lot of these tech companies, they don't even get to market before they're acquired by larger players. So, I'm really interested in the kind of the nitty gritty, the businesses that the average person relies on every day. And what I'm saying is that if you look at some of the really interesting direct to consumer businesses, these are businesses that have entered very crowded markets with different value propositions, and they've taken off. So if I'm a local business, the reality is that if somebody loves you here, there's no reason why they wouldn't love you elsewhere. These entrepreneurs I'm interviewing today, one of them is a fashion brand. The other one is a watch brand. This guy came to Canada from Nigeria, went to Carleton, studied engineering, and launched a business that now sells into 15 countries. Who'd have thought? So the reality is that I would say to any business, look, first of all, decide what it is you care about as an entrepreneur. Not everybody wants to get rich. A lot of business is about self-actualization, which is why I love entrepreneurship. But the bigger issue is understand how your consumer is being shaped and understand what the market potential is for your business based on what you want out of it. And then start looking more broadly. The market's out there. It's easy to target people today, far easier than it's ever been. Look at your opportunity fully.
Self-actualization. That's a great word. Haven't heard that one before. I mean, I can absolutely relate to what you're talking about, Robert. Prior to COVID, I would host in-person trade shows for SMEs in Ottawa. But when I've adapted using this amazing virtual platform, my reach is global. And I'm actually experiencing that. And Ottawa, as we all know, is such a small market. But it's that credibility and goodwill that you've developed in your hometown. I would think, and feel free to agree or disagree, that to really launch any type of business, you need that hometown feel, like that crew to really push for you, at least to start, to get more of a name globally. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the nature of the business, to be honest with you. I mean, I think what I would say is, I'll give you an example. So about 10 years ago, there was a brand that launched. You may have seen their ad. They're called the Dollar Shave Club. Okay. This guy basically looked at Gillette's market and said, you know what, people are overpaying for razors. He spends $4,500. He creates a really funny video that is basically for digital distribution. The business was acquired, I think, 6 years after it launched for $1 billion by Unilever. Look at that business. Does that business need to rely on a local community? No, it's specifically built to not be for a local community. So the thing I would say is it depends on the business. But another way I think I potentially support what you're saying is if you can't sell it down the street, chances are you can't sell it around the globe. So the reality is that you're better off finding a test market, making sure, validating, go off Broadway. If you want to go big time, just go off Broadway with your brand, test it out locally, see how it does, and then take it abroad. So in a way, I suppose that complements what you're saying. But I will say you don't necessarily need to just focus your launch on the local market and see that as the only place you'll be.
Yeah, I know that's such a good point, Robert, too, because I mean, having a test market, wherever that is important to see if your product is viable to begin with, because like you said, you could try and push it out globally, but if it's terrible locally, it's probably going to be terrible globally as well. So
yeah,
it's a nice little test run to see how things go.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
So, Robert, for you, I mean, it sounds like other than, of course, the move changing countries and shifting all that around, the pandemic overall hasn't dramatically affected your sort of entrepreneurial enterprises and all that sort of stuff. What is it as we're sort of pulling ourselves out of this that you are most excited for to sort of look forward to?
Yeah, so I, from a business standpoint, I'm a massive believer in the transformative potential of business. I'm a huge believer that, first of all, while I work and I have worked with some leading educational institutions, the fact is you don't need a degree to start a business. I think what you need to have is a deep belief and a passion for something. And the fact is that I'm really excited by the fact that we are seeing the numbers go up in terms of new business starts. I think that we've got a lot of young people today, because of the uncertainty of the job market, that are seriously looking at creating businesses. And all of that makes us a richer community. So the fact is, what I'm super excited about is seeing that unfold. Because what we've witnessed over the last 15 years in particular is the fact that large companies can be disrupted. About 18 months ago, I had to do a piece of work that involved looking at Fortune 500 companies. And I discovered that at that time, 73% of them were losing market share. 73% of Fortune 500 companies were losing market share. And they were often losing market share to businesses with sales below $100 million. What's fascinating about that is you've got to think about this. If you're a Fortune 500 company, you've got unbelievable wealth, massive distribution. You can go to the best business schools and hire the best talent. You've got market intelligence and marketing dollars coming out the wazoo. How is it possible these companies are being disrupted? They're being disrupted not by bigger resources. They're being disrupted by better ideas. And the thing is, this is what I witnessed by leaving Ottawa. I'm speaking to entrepreneurs around the world and seeing them with a fire in their belly to create a new generation of great companies. And the thing is, what I'm excited by is to see some of that starting to happen more and more here in our local market. That's what excites me.
Robert, during COVID, so are you experiencing more of an uptick in entrepreneurship, the whole concept of starting a business, people who have been furloughed, laid off, thinking this could be a chance for me to pursue my passion, my hobby, and now they have to learn about many of the actual aspects of entrepreneurship. Are you finding that there is more interest during COVID because of the situation?
I would say generally I've seen over the last few years overall more interest. But if you look at the U.S. numbers in terms of new business starts, they've seen record numbers in the last 12 months of new business starts. So I'd say generally, yeah, I am witnessing more and more of that.
Your personal future, Robert. You've already gone through quite a lot of changes in the last little while. Let's put your crystal ball fedora on. Let's say 6 months or a year down the road. How do you think, one, your personal future will change, and two, how the whole, the concept of big question, how the concept of entrepreneurship will change as we either live with COVID or move on from it?
I mean, I certainly feel like we're moving on from it. There's no question. I mean, it feels like we're in the tail end of this thing, and unless something horrible happens, we're probably going to be past it. There's no question that there's going to be a lasting effect. It's no surprise you're hearing companies. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's the global head of HR for a big, huge company, and she was saying that in the holding company within London, across the board, they said cut all office space by 30%. And not only, it's not because they're cutting people, it's because they're saying to people, you're going to be definitely working part of your week from home. So the fact is that, there's going to be big changes. I think what this has probably done is shaken up people's sense of comfort and reality somewhat. And I think that, that can be really scary for some. And for others, it can be a wake-up call to say, you know what, screw this. I want to do something different. And I think that will definitely lead to more businesses being started. Where I'm going, to be honest with you, this is a new and perhaps final chapter in my career. I felt I deliberately left Ottawa to go and see the way the rest of the world operated. And I think I've done that. I've come back and I say often, we're in a G7 capital. It's one of the best educated, most affluent cities in the world. There is zero holding us back from creating disruptive, amazing companies other than our willingness to do so. So I'm excited to try and hopefully contribute to the excitement and the ideas that are generated here.
Carleton University's Sprott business is internationally known. When people come to you for knowledge or a mentorship, do they already have an idea of starting a business, or they kind of bounce ideas off of you? What is the process of that during COVID?
So, as you know, I also work with Invest Ottawa as an advisor. It's a real mixed bag. I think, the idea of running a business, the idea of working for yourself is something that a lot of people love. So, whenever I bump into people about the idea of entrepreneurship, they're always saying, "Oh, I'd love to start a business one day."
The concept is great, but it's a whole different bag.
Yeah, the reality is a very different bag. And but the bottom line is I was quite successful in a corporate career, and I chose to leave that environment to get back into entrepreneurship. For all the risk, for all the fact that I loved the business class travels and the nice hotels, I'd rather be a pirate than be in the Navy, but that works for me. So the fact is, I think a lot of people are generally interested in entrepreneurship. Most of the people that come to me or that I coach or mentor have an idea. I think one of the things, though, for a lot of the small businesses that I see, what they actually lack is a solid business strategy. That's the biggest problem. One of the things I say to all of them is, you got to remember, the consumer's money is all spent and their time is all gone, but it's never been a better time to start a business. So that causes an entrepreneur to have to really deeply understand the life of their consumer. I worked with an innovation group in a big company, European company, and they said their approach to innovation was to come up with an answer and then go look for a question. And that's one of the things I've witnessed with a lot of entrepreneurs. Bakers start bakeries, engineers start tech firms. But often they make this assumption that because they can do it, someone will be interested in buying it. And that is not the way to go about this. So what I encounter with a lot of people is I get them to try and reassess and to really deeply understand the consumer and where they potentially fit in their lives. Because once you understand that, it forces you to look at the competition differently. So that's what I often encounter.
Yeah, no, that's great, Robert. So I was just thinking in terms of, I know you're sort of fresh back in the Ottawa community, but in terms of COVID and our sort of restart and all that sort of stuff, in your opinion, what can we do as a community to sort of fire up some of these people? I know we often are deemed the sleepy government town and all that sort of stuff, but I know deep down there's an underbelly of entrepreneurs just ready to go.
I think there's a couple of things to consider. I think first, there is a lot of stuff happening below the surface that a lot of people are not aware of. I was chatting with somebody recently about this. There's a really vibrant arts, music, cultural scene that most people are not tapped into. And I think that it is micro communities within our own city that are doing their own thing, that that the swath of the middle class just isn't switched on to. So I would say, first and foremost, be a little bit more daring, get out there and discover something new in your own community. Because the more that happens, the more the culture will bloom within the city. So that's one thing. The other thing is, a number of years ago, I worked on the launch of a beer brand. We had to choose a market to launch in, and I looked at the dynamics of Ottawa. I looked at the dynamics of other cities, and what was interesting was decision was down between, do we launch in Ottawa, do we launch in Toronto? We found the same type of consumer, but in Toronto they dine out a lot more than they do in Ottawa. They earn the same, they're educated to the same level, but Ottawans don't dine out, and these guys do. And I would say, get out there, like, support small businesses. I was at a place yesterday having drinks with my wife, and I asked them how they're doing. They said it's still slow. They said just people are not coming back. And it's like, first of all, if you're not vaccinated, get vaccinated. If you are vaccinated, get out there, because the fact is, if the high street starts closing its doors, then that's going to affect your community. So get out there and get off of Amazon and get back into the stores and the restaurants again and support them.
Lead into our next question. What, outside of getting out there, what else can the community do to help local small business?
What can the community do other than get out there?
Like perhaps on social media. I'm just brainstorming.
Yeah, to be honest with you, that's triggered a thought in me. The fact is, I don't think it's up to the community to go out of their way to support small business. I'm saying get out there and spend, get out there and start to live life again. But that's almost as a general comment for an individual. The fact is, I'm not one of these people that really believes that. I think that businesses have to earn those reviews. I think that businesses have to earn the word of mouth referrals that a consumer gives in. So I would say it's a two-way street. If you want to be supported by the local community, then be better in everything you do. Provide a better product, provide better service, be more accessible, all of that kind of thing. So I would say a lot of it is be the kind of business that you would want to do business with. And then to the local community, I'd say time to take off the mask, go out there and start to enjoy life a little bit more.
That's my big hope, to be honest, for people. On the sort of flip side of this, as people become more safe in their own sort of new normal, or whatever you want to call it, is that they get back out. And hopefully the last 2 years, they've realized, man, sitting at home is boring. I would like to go do some things. I would like to see some culture. I'd like to see what's out there a bit more. So my hope is, even for Sleepy Ottawa, that people get off their couches and they go experience life a little bit more. And in turn, that'll help all of the small businesses and the community organizations and all that stuff, because people are going to be hopefully getting more involved and more out there in the sort of community as things unfold.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right. But going back to one of the earlier points we discussed, which is the importance of a local business, depending on the nature of their business, to take a look at the world around them. I just don't think it's realistic that a business can be inaccessible, sell products that are higher priced or that are on par to bigger competitors, and should expect to be supported just because they're local. Small businesses have to compete. And so I would say, yes, the community does have to get out there a bit more. But I also just reiterate what I said is those businesses need to be prepared. It's funny. We talk about Amazon and the effect of Amazon on Main Street businesses. Amazon is 25 years old. Okay. They've been around a long time. So the fact is, if you're a local business, it's within your power to do the kinds of things that will bring people to you. So, give that some hard thought. Why should somebody get off the couch, get in their car, or walk down the street and see you? Take a look at that. This is not business as usual. What has happened over the last 18 months is consumers that traditionally weren't shopping as much online have been forced to shop online and realize, wow, you know what? There's some great stuff out there. And no, it's not that company down the street. And I don't have to actually work that hard to get it. So I think that is putting pressure on businesses to step up. And if by this point you haven't stepped up, well, don't expect to prosper in the future.
It might be a little unpopular, but the whole concept of the shop local movement, if entrepreneurs are sitting there pleading with the community to help them out, but they don't pivot themselves, then where is the onus? If they go out of business, whose fault is it? I mean, well, okay, there's a big question, but the entrepreneurs themselves, like you're addressing, Robert, have to adapt. And now during COVID, yeah, it's if you don't, then you might not be in business, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's not, if we're talking specifically, and by the nature of the question, it's probably, we're talking about retail businesses. So whether you're a food business or whether you're any type of retail business, the number of times that you walk into a store and the staff are disengaged and disinterested, stock is out, the environment isn't pleasant. I mean, it's like, I remember I had an experience. It wasn't here actually, but I remember I walked into a shoe store. I was looking for a new pair of running shoes. First of all, I had to fight to find a staff member. I finally found a staff member, and they gave me a pair of shoes to try on. I put one shoe on. I said, "Can I try the other one on?" The person actually said to me, "I'm not allowed to give you the other shoe. You have to give me that shoe back." I said, "What?" They said, "Not my problem, managers." So I could not put both shoes on. I just said to them, "Do you realize why you deserve to lose to Amazon?" Now, again, that was an Ottawa business, but I've had experiences in Ottawa businesses that were not that far off from that. So it's like, I remember I worked on something a couple of years ago. I co-published a book on the future of retail. And I had the chance to work with architects and store designers from Apple and Lululemon, Barnes & Noble, et cetera, really looking at what does retail have to do to survive? And it's the message from 150 of these leaders was, you got to get back to the fundamentals. You got to have staff that are actually properly trained, properly compensated. You got to do visual merchandising that's exciting and interesting. Show me something in your store that I can't find easily elsewhere. Curate your product line. Know your customer. Know what your community likes. This is all the stuff that is fundamental to having a great business. And I think what happens is this, and again, it is slightly controversial, but to me, support your local business starts by having businesses that are worth supporting. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Robert, honestly. And like you said, I thought it was interesting just about pricing and all that stuff. So if your product is identical to your competitors, you're more expensive, you're less accessible, why should you get that business, right? So, I mean, you have to differentiate yourself if that's the case. You have to figure out a way to separate yourself from your competitors. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time, right? Realistically. And now people have been forced into this online shopping world, whether they liked it or not, and have realized that, wow, I save an hour if I don't go all the way down to this store to go pick up this same item, and I save 20% at the same time. So why wouldn't I make that choice? So it's just a matter of positioning it, right?
Absolutely. And I had a recent experience. I ended up spending probably around $2,000 on some equipment, and I ended up going to a local store. And it's funny because all the stuff that I bought at that store, I could have bought on Amazon. Absolutely. But it was technical enough in nature that I would rather have dealt with somebody than try and figure it out myself. And I'll tell you, I went into that store with reticence. I thought, oh God, again, I was just cynical because I'm turned off of a lot of stores. These guys blew me away. The first of all, the person that served me had been in that store for 22 years. Their knowledge about their gear was amazing. He wasn't the owner of the store. He wasn't even the manager of the store. He was a guy that just loved what he did. This guy helped me. He spent 90 minutes with me setting up the equipment in the store that I needed and just helping me figure it out. I went back for a technical issue. I encountered another person that was equally switched on. It's like, I didn't even think about Amazon after that. I was like, was I paying more? I didn't even check the price. Maybe I was. But that whole engagement and peace of mind and knowing that I could go back to somebody gave me confidence that that was a better option than trying to save a few dollars online. That's what stores should be about.
There might be a reason why they've been in business so long.
Yeah, there probably is. You're right.
Excellent.
Well, it's tapping into the expertise too, that you don't take into account, right? There's no expertise on Amazon. You get a pile of stupid reviews and dumb questions people have asked, but you don't get any sort of real interaction with a professional that says, yeah, I've been doing this 20 years. So what do you need exactly? And how can I curate this for you? So there's a lot more to be added in value that's not actual physical value, right? It's the sort of intrinsic value of people's skill sets and experience and all that sort of stuff, which again is a nice differentiator for a local business.
And providing a second shoe when you're purchasing them.
And you know what? Here's the thing that I say to companies, like, the fact is that you cannot, I do a lecture on this. The fact is that today the single most important channel of influence is the consumer, is word of mouth. The reality is that you cannot lie to consumers. You cannot bullshit your way into their basket. The fact is that went out the window with the internet. But we've underestimated this. A lot of large brands still go into any product launch and they start with a television ad. Well, guess what? 87% of consumers actively avoid advertising. When they get to the store, depending on this, like take a grocery store, consumers are on autopilot. You cannot effectively communicate in that environment. So the fact is that a lot of what you need to engage and to actually activate a consumer in your favor is the stuff that is within your control. So if you're a small business, you don't need to try and outspend your competition. You don't need to have something that's wildly different than what a consumer is used to stand out. Just do the basics well. Be open at appropriate times. As I said, have great service. Have a thoughtful product range. All of that stuff over time is going to engage the consumer in such a way, because you know what? They're walking into all kinds of shops and getting the opposite of that. You don't have to basically create the next hover car to have a successful business. Go back to the basics. This is what I say to companies. There's no point in focusing on a big idea when it's the small detail that's losing you business. Focus there first and build from there.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I wish we had more time, Robert. There's so much wisdom here, but we're coming to the end of our segment today. Do you have any last closing thoughts of wisdom on how entrepreneurs of all sizes can successfully pivot, at least during COVID?
What I say to every company that I speak to is, what I want you to do is I want you to get inside the brain of your consumer. It doesn't matter to me what kind of business, what size of business I start working on. The very first thing I do is I want to understand the context around what triggers a consumer to buy a product in a given category. This is something that I've done, my specialization is consumer behavior. And what I've discovered is that by getting inside their home, getting inside their head, and understanding what their real needs are, what their real values are, and then plotting that journey, understanding how do people buy, what motivates them to buy, you can actually find moments. These are called peak experience moments, where you realize, actually, it's not the big story. It's the small thing. It's answering the phone properly. It's making sure if there's a problem with your product that you're there and you're saying, we're going to fix it. So the thing that I would say is, I know that when you're an entrepreneur, when you're in business, the operation of a business can overwhelm you, but you must never. In fact, this is what happens with a lot of large companies. A lot of the big companies, this is the thing that brought me back from wanting to work with big companies and focus on small businesses, is in a large company, the consumer's abstract. They're a number on a spreadsheet. In a real business, a small business, you look your customer in the eye every day. And it's so vitally important that you understand them, because it's by understanding them that you'll understand what they really value, what they're willing to pay for, what more you can sell to them, and where you've got to basically have engagement to create the greatest impact. So I'd say my advice to any entrepreneur is, you think you know your consumer, you probably don't know them well enough. So go back and try and live life through their eyes again and see if there's opportunities that you're missing.
I think if more people did that, there'd be some drastic shifts in the way businesses are run. That's great wisdom.
Yeah.
So Robert, thank you so much. How can somebody get in touch with you, please?
So the easiest way to get in touch with me is by email. So I'm happy to share. It's robert.hocking, which is HOCKING, at virtualiq.co. That's the way to get in touch with me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So today we were joined by Robert Hocking as an entrepreneur, teacher, and writer on the Pivoted Success podcast, hosted by Sean Cochran from TCC Canada, myself, Jared Goldsmith from eSAX Virtual Events. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks, guys.